I'm going to read from a chapter from the biography, and this is a chapter about the writing of a biography about Marilyn Monroe, which was conceived by Larry Schiller, who had the pictures, and Mailer, who provided the text. In 1972, Larry Schiller agreed to pay Norman Mailer $50,000 to write a preface to a collection of photographs of Marilyn Monroe that he had earlier assembled for an exhibition. As Mailer wrote the preface, he got excited, and the preface kept growing. At some point, he realized he was embarking on a biography. He would rely on earlier biographies for the basic facts, add new ones obtained from interviews, and draw on his own experience. Quote, "I know an awful lot about living with one's legend," he said later, "and I know an awful lot, as a result, about the sort of separation of mind that goes on. I know what it is like to live a little bit on the edge of schizophrenia," end quote. His time in Hollywood had given him insights into the sensibilities of actors, and his sports writing, especially his profile of Muhammad Ali, gave him a sense of how Monroe's second husband, Joe DiMaggio's ego might function. Mailer's Brooklyn roots were a factor, he said, not merely because Arthur Miller, her third husband, came from there, but because Monroe, quote, "had the basic stuff out of which Brooklyn dream girls are made." Beneath her celebrity, her comic ability, her beauty, and her sexuality was her divided self. Mailer believed that there were existential similarities, as he put it, between them. Monroe was both sweetly vulnerable and a strong-minded careerist. Depending on who you listened to, she was either sexually voracious or terrifically frigid. Lacking much formal education, she was intellectually ambitious and read Freud, Whitman, Edna St. Vincent Millay, and Joyce's Ulysses. She was brave, she was timid. Most appealing to Mailer was her determination to be a great movie star. His description of her intense desire to succeed recalls his own. That's a quote. She'd finally laid down a directive for herself. She'd become the instrument of her will. And her will said, "You will succeed." Whenever anyone does that, they take everything that's weak in them and they submerge it, very often for years. All hegemony is given to the strength. There'll be a much weaker personality traveling with that strong personality, which has its own habits, its own demands, and will become more and more inflamed, end quote. Mailer had seen many of the photographs that would be in the Monroe book, Schiller photographs, but hadn't given much thought as to how they would appear. But for Schiller, the layout of the photographs by world-famous photographers, Richard Avedon, Cecil Beaton, Burt Stern, as well as Schiller, was the main chance. The text was secondary. Dyslexic and blind in one eye from a childhood accident, Schiller was not much of a reader. He had to lock himself into the bathroom and concentrate just to read a newspaper article. He recalled that when he was working on the book with Mailer, he could count on one hand all the books that he had read in his life. Despite this, he believed the exhibition of Monroe photographs that he had assembled to be the heart of an iconic book. He hired a leading book designer and initially gave as much thought to Mailer's text as Mailer gave to the photographs. It was Mailer's name and what he stood for that he wanted. Quote, "We're laying out the book to make it exciting," Schiller said, "to make it lovable, huggable, and fuckable, you know. And so it doesn't matter who the writer is, as long as the text is controversial." All Schiller wanted, as Mailer said later, was, quote, "some nice gray matter between the photographs." When Schiller went to Stockbridge at Mailer's invitation, he got his first inkling of their opposed conceptions of the book. Schiller was a bit nervous, remembering Mailer's reputation as a brawler. "I expected someone like the Hulk," he said, but he found his host to be very polite, very courteous, and the evening started well. "This guy's going to be easy for me to handle," Schiller recalled thinking. But then they began discussing the book and looking at the approximately 50 photos that Schiller had brought with him. Mailer wasn't entirely pleased. He liked some pictures, but not others, and asked questions about their placement. Later, when Mailer saw the layout, he was unhappy. He told Bob Markle, the editor at Grosset and Dunlap, that he wanted some pictures moved around or he wasn't going to let the book be published. Markle told Schiller, who replied, Mailer didn't own the book. Quote, I'm not going to fuck up the book because of some writer's threats, he said. If need be, he'd throw out Mailer's text and get another writer. Schiller had final approval of the text. Marilyn, the title of the book, Marilyn, a novel biography, had been well publicized. A deal had been cut with the Book of the Month Club, and expectations were high. Markle, caught in a bind, suggested a meeting at the Friendship Lounge of JFK Airport. Mailer came into the meeting, quote, striding like he's coming out of the corner of the ring ready to box, Schiller said. He looked me right in the goddamn eye to see if I'm going to blink. Page by page, they go through the book. Mailer suggests moving several photographs next to his text, violating the original design. Schiller fires back. Your text is strong enough to stand alone, isn't it? You're a writer, aren't you? Mailer replies that this was the first time he has ever written anything illustrated by pictures and, quote, it's going to be the way I want it. They argue back and forth, and as Markle recalled, I had to go out with each of them for individual walks and cooling off periods. At some point, Mailer suggested that some photos be reduced in size and placed in the margin of the oversized book at chronologically pertinent points. Schiller argued against it vehemently, Markle said, but ultimately he compromised. The basic design would not be changed, however. Realizing that he needed a publicity photo of Mailer, Schiller asked him to go outside, which broke the tension, and Schiller shot a roll of black and white film with his Leica. Mailer was, quote, pretty mad, Schiller said, after he left the meeting, but I was on the train to success and with the book, and nothing was going to deter me. Schiller wanted to get Mailer and Monroe on the cover of Time magazine. The magazine made the first move, asking for interviews with Mailer and Schiller. The editors also asked for some photos from the book. It was agreed that Marilyn would be the cover story for the July 16th issue. When Time showed Schiller the proposed cover, he didn't like it and refused to supply the final photos. Mailer was unaware of all of this. Time was running short, and Time's editors were getting angry. Then a gent called Will Hopkins, who was working with Schiller on other parts of the project, came up with an idea. Send Time magazine a layout of what we think the cover should look like. A photo of Monroe mussing up the hair of French actor Yves Montand, with whom she had a brief affair, but substitute Mailer's head for Montand's. Schiller had the photos of Mailer he had taken at the Friendship Lounge. Knowing that the magazine had never allowed anyone but its own staff to assign or design a cover, Schiller and Hopkins made up a dummy and sent it to Time's picture editor, unaccompanied by a letter or return address. It worked. 6 days later, the picture editor contacted Schiller and asked for the originals of the two photos, the one of Monroe in color and Mailer in black and white. The photos were sent, and the cover appeared as created by Hopkins and Schiller. Mailer still had no idea what the cover would look like, and Schiller knew that when he found out, quote, it's going to drive him fucking crazy. The magazine appeared the same week as Mailer's interview with Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes. Schiller recalled that shortly after the magazine appeared, Mailer either called him or saw him in person. I remember him saying very strongly, Schiller said, with that fucking Time magazine cover, I'm never going to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he did say it to me in just those words. I'm not fabricating them. Schiller wasn't particularly bothered at first, he said, but later, quote, I remember it haunting me a lot of times, that in my own way I had not perceived how something could really hurt somebody who was very, very important. Over the years, he said, quote, those words just ring in my ears all the time. Mailer's memory was somewhat different, but not contradictory. The book, however, makes several reviewers of the book noted that Mailer didn't know Marilyn Monroe, as if this was a disqualification for a biographer. The book, however, makes it quite clear that Mailer had never met her and that he was offering, quote, a literary hypothesis of a possible Marilyn Monroe who might actually have lived and fit most of the facts available, end quote. This hypothesis is grounded in Mailer's theory of the two selves that all of us contain, selves that are, quote, analogous in our mental life to twin trees. In Monroe's case, her early years at the orphanage gave Mailer a clue. Quote, Since the orphan's presence in the world is obliged to turn drab, the life of fantasy and compensation can become extreme. We are all steeped in the notion that lonely, withdrawn people have a large life of inner fantasy. What may be ignored is the tendency to become locked into a lifelong rapture with one's fantasy, to become a narcissist. The word, however, fails to suggest the hermetic imprisonment of such a love affair, the depth of the incapacity to love anyone else except as a servant of one's dream of glamour, end quote. Laid bare here is what Mailer believed to be the mainspring of Monroe's psychology, and with some qualifications, his own as well. He was no orphan, but his narcissism, born of early spectacular success, parallels her. He uses the same word, Napoleonic, to describe her desire to capture the attention of the world that he often used in connection with his own. Quote, "She is her career, and her career is herself," he says, and this shoe fits him as well, if not quite as snugly. Like him, she is an actor with many faces. Quote, "No one can be certain whether she was playing an old role, experimenting with a new one, or even being nothing less than the true self, which she had spent her life trying to discover," end quote. Part of her tragedy, Mailer implies, was not recognizing that her achievements were of necessity built on two foundations. The trying on of faces by great actors, Mailer continues, is the desperate search for an identity. Quote, "It is no ordinary identity that will suit them, and no ordinary desperation can drive them. The force that propels a great actor in his youth is insane ambition," end quote. Monroe's whirligig nature can only be captured by a novelist, he says. His biography must be seen, therefore, as a species of novel ready to play by the rules of a biography. He puts it another way: set a thief to catch a thief, and put an artist on an artist, end quote. Great actors, Monroe, Brando, like great politicians, Kennedy, Nixon, great poets, Lowell, Ginsberg, great boxers, Muhammad Ali, are best grasped by the handles of identity and ambition. Novelists are best equipped to do the grasping, and great novelists have the surest hands. Thank you. Thank you.